been a professional writer for about 25 years or so, and only recently, by recently I mean in the last maybe 12 years, I've gotten into children's books. Kind of happened by accident. I was known for doing writing some Sherlock Holmes stories before that, and the editor of the book company contacted me and wanted to know if I was interested in doing a graphic novel version of Hound of the Baskervilles for kids, to introduce kids to Sherlock Holmes. And this was before Benedict Cumberbatch and all that, a few years before. And so Holmes was, I won't say fading from the public memory, but you know how it goes. People have a very short memory and stuff like this. So
I was trending up.
I was delighted to do it, very nervous to do it, because I took the responsibility seriously, that I have to present this character in a way that kids will find it interesting, and you know, maybe want to go to the real books when they get a little older. I never knew quite what age I was writing at. They never really told me. I assume they're like 4th to 6th grade levels. I assume, but I don't know. I never wrote down to them, you know, to kids or whatever. And they edited my stuff very little, so I guess that was okay. But yeah, one of the things I did immediately in the script was ask for Holmes and Watson to be younger than they're usually portrayed, which is actually the way it is in the stories. I mean, Holmes is actually the very first Sherlock Holmes story that Conan Doyle wrote, Study in Scarlet, is only supposed to be about like 24 or 26 years old. And it's hard to imagine it that way because we're used to seeing him on the early version. But yeah, he was just, that's what he was. And Watson was 2 years old. So I almost always portrayed Watson kind of old. You know, at least the way I saw it as a kid, I was like, why is he so old? You know? Yeah. And the weird thing about it is the old Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes movies, which is what I kind of grew up on. You know, Nigel Bruce playing Dr. Watson seemed ages older than Basil Rathbone, but Basil Rathbone was older than him by about 4 years. Very strange. So anyway, I wrote the book, and after that, they approached me wanting to know if I was interested in doing a retelling of some of the Grimm's fairy tales. And, which, of course, you know, I like to pay my mortgage, so yes, of course I'm interested. And so they had a number of books, like Rapunzel was one, and I think Hansel and Gretel was another, and Red Riding Hood. And they asked me if I was interested in any of those, I could pick one to write. And I picked Red Riding Hood, and the guy was stunned. He was like, really? Are you serious? I said, why? What's wrong with Red Riding Hood? I said, well, everybody else has turned it down and offered to it. They said they didn't have anything they could say about it that hadn't been said. You know, and I was like, but it's the most famous fairy tale in the world, probably. I mean, why wouldn't you want your name on that? You know, I didn't get it. So I started researching it a little bit, and I began to see what they meant, because there were a lot of versions of Red Riding Hood. I found out that it was the story is about 2,000 years old, at least in recorded history. It's Chinese. It's a Chinese myth. The wolf is actually a fox in the original story. It's not a hood, but a cat. But otherwise, it's essentially the same story. But I imagine it's much older than that. It probably goes back to the caves, even. You know, I mean, it's kind of a cautionary tale. But don't leave the cave at night. You know, I mean, that's the kind of thing. Your grandma's figuring out kind of thing. But I don't know. I remember kind of struggling over it because I thought this isn't going to be as easy as I thought it was going to be. And then really the only thing that I could think to do, which I hadn't seen in like maybe 14, 15 different versions that I'd read, was to make Red Riding Hood solve her own problem. So she doesn't rely on the dad or hunter figures, different things in different stories. She gets herself out of the problem herself. And I didn't realize at the time that I was adding this kind of girl power thing that started showing up in all the articles about it. I'm glad it happened, but it wasn't me going, you know, this needs. No, there's an accident. It was just me not knowing what else to do with it. But I enjoyed it very much, and then was successful and caught on. And before long, they were asking me to do it with several others. I've written about 30 kids' books like that by now. Usually a couple a year is more is what I really get to do. The most recent ones I did was there was one they wanted what they call twisted fairy tales. And these they wanted to be less like the originals and more for like a modern audience. So they assigned me The Princess and the Pea first, which I turned into a detective story. And asked if I could change the princess character into an Asian American. And surprisingly, they said yes. And I was surprised. And then after that, while I was still putting the finishing touches on that story, they asked me if I was interested in something like Rapunzel that they wanted to do. And I don't know what it was, like immediate flash in my head, I thought, living dreadlocks kind of thing. So I asked if they could be an African American girl with dreadlocks that moved. And I thought, why are they moving? How about Rapunzel versus Frankenstein kind of thing? So that's how that came to be. Those are actually my two favorites, probably, of all I've done. So it's been fun. It's not easy writing for kids. A lot of people think it would be. It's not at all. It's probably some of the hardest stuff I've ever done, actually. But I enjoy it very much. I hope to continue doing it. It's kind of different when you're a writer like me that goes over several different genres. Sometimes it's kind of hard to shift gears into whatever mode you're trying to do. But the kids' book things, that's fairly easy for me to get into that mindset. But I guess by saying that they're very difficult to write, I think what I really mean is I take a lot more attention to them while I'm writing. And it's been a lot of fun so far. How about you?
Well, the twisted, fairy tales is actually my access point to you, and I know you've written this great massive work professionally over years, but so I'm on the other side of that spectrum. I had a whole career in counseling. I ran a clinic for recovering opiate addicts and worked with people recovering from addiction for years and years and years. And then I finally semi-retired and became a teacher. And there's a lot of connection between a middle schooler and someone in recovery. The irony there, middle schoolers are fun. But I became a teacher at the middle school, high school level. And I actually came across your books because anytime I see a kid reading, and I've done it long enough now that I'm curious whether or not they're doing it to get caught or whether they're doing it because they want. But if I ever see a kid reading on his own just for fun, I always reward them in my class, so you get some points or whatnot for that. But one of my kids was reading those and had one, and then a couple days later had another, a couple days later, and he was just pulling them from the library like sweet tarts or something, just couldn't get enough of them. But I'm a high school and middle school teacher, and one of the reasons I started writing was I realized that boys in particular weren't reading. And it just broke my heart because it was such a part of my childhood and my friend's childhood. And so, not that I'm the answer, I don't ever have that kind of ego or anything, but at least in my little block of the world, I wanted to do something to encourage that. And so I started writing middle grade and high school books that were targeted toward male readers. And a lot of them have, you can see that I'm a counselor in them because I usually have some kid with, who's having some kind of anxiety or something like that, anti-bullying, those kind of things or whatever. But we were talking before this started about the bidding hall and the business side of it. But I have a couple of adult books that I have with a small publishing company, but I've chosen to do all of mine independent so that I can give them out as classroom sets at cost. I'm on sites like Teacher Pay Teachers, where teachers can download resources for them. So there's study guides and like the jam sessions, the kid learns to journal. And so there's journal entries, and a teacher can read this book with their class. And and do it. So that's really been my goal, I guess, as a writer, is to be a small part of hopefully reclaiming the male reader. It does mean I occasionally write some books that are adult, because one of the things I've found in my writing journey now, about 6 years, is high school boys don't read young adult, they just jump to adult. So they go straight to Stephen King or Game of Thrones, or, you know, they don't hang out. Yeah, that's what, and when I saw a kid reading that, I thought, that's what I did too, you know? And so I've started writing some more adult sci-fi kind of stuff. That's toned down a little bit, you know, so it's a little more age appropriate, but that's me. So I'm a high school teacher, middle school teacher, and recovering counselor. Recovering counselor, yeah, that's right.
That's awesome. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Darren Bush. I'm a science fiction and fantasy short story writer. I have, my intersection with this conversation is that my stuff that's published for youths is actually nonfiction. I actually helped write a couple of textbooks and wrote a chapter on math for a special ed textbook that was intended for this same audience. But also, I have attempted, with moderate success, to write several children's books. They're not published, but they're sitting there waiting for me to do something with them. So the target audience is in my thoughts, because when I worked in special education, that was most of the kids I worked with were tweens or teenagers, younger teenagers, struggling with things like algebra and geometry and stuff like that.
I was one of those kids.
But there were a lot of them. I was busy.
I don't
And after COVID, exponential. I mean, yeah, it's just so many kids are behind, and we have, you know, it's the old butting the heads of, we know what to do, but there's policy, you know, and so there's this policy of you teach this on Thursday, you know, February 4th, and on the 5th you move to this equation or whatever, but yeah, kids who just didn't do anything for a year.
Well, you guys are heroes to me, because I'm dyslexic. I didn't know what that was when I was a kid. I just thought I was dumb. And I mean, I got good grades in everything but math. And I didn't understand what was wrong with me. You know, everybody else was getting it, and I just didn't. I remember my mom, who was really good at it. I said, how did that happen? And so she showed me how to invert fractions and stuff. And I'm like, they're already inverted. You know, I mean, I didn't understand what she was saying. And somehow I squeaked by. You know, I did all right, enough to, I mean, I wasn't getting failing the grades or anything, but it wasn't like my other subjects. And finally, it wasn't until I was in college that I started to realize, hey, this is probably what's wrong with me. Yeah, I looked into it more, and that's fine. So,
Yeah.
It's weird, it has its mood swings. Some days I'm better at it than others. And, I mean, I can balance a checkbook, but I need to recheck it several different times. That kind of thing. So yeah, so you guys way up on me.
Well, I didn't mean for the panel to turn into a discussion about educating youths, but it could if you guys want. I don't care. But
I think that's what we're doing.
I mean, the reason why I think it's relevant to this discussion is, at least in my experience, one of the big things I learned in essentially having my job be to work with kids that had communication problems of various different kinds, was I learned really quickly that the easiest way to lose somebody is to talk down to them. That was not an option for me. And so when I started sitting down, and then later I had my own daughter. She's an adult in college now. She survived me, thank goodness. But when she was like 6 or 7 years old, I wanted to write for her specifically. And so I started writing. I wrote a children's book starring her, because you know I'm from. And I started writing this book, and I started writing the thing out, and I was swinging back and forth from like really too primitive with the language, and then getting too sophisticated with the storytelling, and I had to find a middle ground where it wasn't like, I wasn't talking down to my target audience, but I wasn't using $14 words, and I wasn't using all this huge narrative that would lose them. So yeah, for what that's worth.
Well, one of the things too that I found out when you mentioned male readers, it's very true. But I see, I've not as conscientious, I guess, as you, because I never thought of, boy, I'm going to go get more male readers. Because I found out probably 20 years ago or so that from an agent that I did have, I don't have an agent now. Yes, I recommend not having an agent. But he told me, he told me that from what he could tell, that my vast majority of my readers were women and girls. And I was a little surprised at that at the time because I didn't think I was writing that kind of material. And the longer I did it, I started hearing that more and more from publishers and so forth, like 70% they were telling me. It's a pretty big percentage. And I thought, why is that? And it took me again, I'm slow, so it took me again a few more years to figure it out. And it's just because they read. And a lot of men and boys don't. And it's as simple as that. And of course, I mean, that was my experience when I was in school. If you look in my yearbook, which has pathetically very few autographs in it, but the few that are in there, it says things like, you read, and stuff like that, just like, because they didn't know me. I just like, you want to sign my book? Yeah, you read. And so they knew that. And I remember one time being in class and I was reading a book, because we were done with the classwork for the day, so I was reading this book. It was a Doc Savage book, by the way. So this one kid kind of snatched it away from me and said something derogatory about it. And the teacher grabbed the book from him, smacked him in the face with it, and handed it back to me and said, "At least he reads, you dumbass." I was like, "You're my favorite teacher ever." And not long ago on Facebook, I found him. And I told him about that. He said, "I don't necessarily remember you, but I remember that." And I said, "Oh, wow." And we've become really good friends since then. So it's been really nice. He's a great guy. But yeah, so I never really thought, wow, I wonder if I can win over more male audiences. But I never thought to try. I don't know if I could have thought how to begin to do it necessarily. And even the stuff I write for Rigorous Girls Incorporated is kind of unconsciously or more or less consciously, I guess, aimed at women readers too, because I specifically wanted to grab that more of a masculine crowd, and I wanted to show that there's stuff of value for girls and women and the Burroughs stuff too. I started a weekly, it's online, a weekly adventure series with Jane that I was trying to work on for 6 years before they finally said, "Oh yeah, we'd like to do that." So doing that now, and it's to me it makes it easier for me to think of new storylines and plots from that, because it's a different point of view that hasn't been done before so much. But Burroughs himself was not unaware of this. I mean, his female protagonists are almost always very self-efficient and strong women at a time when you didn't find that much in popular, literature of the day. Same thing for Conan Doyle as far as that goes. They both kind of seem to understand that. But it's not something that I usually have focused in my head. It's just the way I write. I'm honored to have any readers, but it's wonderful to see women come up to me with their little girls, knowing that they read my stuff. There's a little girl that writes me quite often. She lives in Greece, and had read my Adventures of Hercules book that I did, and that's her favorite hero, she said. And she knows the myth much better than I do. Oh, okay. And she asks me such sophisticated questions that I almost feel like, who is this kid? She's real. I mean, I've seen pictures of her, and I've seen her on Skype and so on and so forth. It's not somebody doing something bizarre. But it's very satisfying to have that happen when you're. I very rarely get to see my young readers. Yeah. Unless I'm doing a reading like at a library or something like that. And that's another thing too that I'm real grateful for, is that the couple kids book publishers that I've worked for, they're both very education minded, and they have some kind of deal, I guess, with the libraries across the country. And so my stuff is in libraries like crazy.
Yeah, that's pivotal. I mean, Bill, I don't know, I assume y'all are coming in and thinking about writing in this genre, or you do write in this genre, because you're not marketing, you're marketing to a gatekeeper, not to your reader. And so you've got to figure that out, you know, so you go set up a table, and most of the time you've got a kid and a parent, and so you've got these two conversations going. And so, yeah, those conversations with librarians are now oftentimes media centralists, or whatever they're called. But you have these gatekeepers. You have that. But I would offer, you all, what questions you all have, or what brought you in here? What made you interested in this panel?
I like writing panels. It sounds like fun.
Okay, cool deal. Cool deal.
So you were saying that, you know, COVID kind of messed up some of the readers. My son definitely got with the virtual learning. He was in second grade when there was virtual learning, and so I mean that's pivotal for learning how to read and stuff. And so he's still way behind. And my way of trying to get him, because I've always been a heavy reader. Like that's what I did. I was proud of myself. In second grade, I read a book that was over 700 pages. And that, it was the Chronicles of Friday Day by
Yes, Lloyd Alexander.
yeah, Lloyd Alexander. I loved that, and then I was a little saddened by the Disney adaptation of Black Calder, but that's okay.
We all are.
But you know, so I wanted my son to have that kind of enjoyment, but he's always been a little bit behind. The way that I've kind of found a little bit of a middle ground is that if I could find a book that's done in like a graphic novel type of way, where he's still, you know, he wants to see the pictures, but if you get the story as well, that's what captivates him. So, you know, I totally understand the need. I don't know what it is, but my littlest though, I think because he sees his big brother reading, he's in first grade, you can already match my fourth grader. So
I'll offer an unprofessional, not worth much opinion.
mm-hmm.
And I mean that. Like this is just my take on it. When I was a kid, if I was watching a TV show, it came out once a week, and if it was a big show, it came out Friday or Saturday. And I didn't talk to my friends for 2 days because we didn't have cell phones, and I'd forgotten about it on Monday. But books I could have with me 24/7. And so, you know, me and my friends would all, I remember ElfQuest was when we got into talking about graphic novels.
Yeah.
You know, we got into ElfQuest. I mean, we had a couple of those in our backpack every day, you know, and we could sit at lunch, all that. And I think those have swapped. So now you can binge watch Wednesday, you know, the show about Addams Family.
Mm-hmm.
You can watch all 10 episodes in a night. You can watch it with friends. You can sync it up and watch it. You talk about it. You have it on your phone.
Yeah.
But it's not cool to carry a book around, you know. And so books are something you do at home. You do it on a Saturday afternoon when no one's, you know. And so it's almost like the culture has swapped those two things. And that's my take. That's my take. And so
I think you hit it.
Yeah, I'm good with that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it used to be too. I mean, remember the days when you go into like any convenience store or something, there's a comic book rack and a paperback rack, and you don't really see that much anymore. Especially comic book racks are gone completely.
right.
You know,
Yeah.
I get people coming to me all the time. Well, when I remember sitting in the second Spider-Man movie, the one with Tobey Maguire, Spider-Man 2, and as the credits were rolling at the end, this couple in front of me said, "You know, I used to read Spider-Man comics when I was a kid. I wonder why they don't publish them anymore." Of course, they've never stopped.
Never stop.
Yeah.
But you know, the average person don't know about comic book shops.
Right.
There's not that many anyway. But it used to be that you found comics at gas stations and at the grocery store.
Yeah.
Just everywhere.
Yeah, and kids carried them, you know, they carried them like a cell phone.
Yeah.
I remember my friends and I, who were all voracious readers still, you know, but we would get together at the beginning of a school year and decide who was buying what so that we could swap. So I'd buy Thor and you'd buy Red Sonja, because we hadn't had Red Sonja, and you know, we'd buy Spider-Man or, you know, like Iron Man, and then we'd just trade through the week. But again, it became the conversation of it.
Early fan.
That's right, that's right. And I just think that's a difficulty, but it's a change of the times.
Yeah, we have to ride with it, though. You know, I mean, I know several, I have several writer friends out there that are kind of curmudgeon-y, and they're like, no, it's going to be this, and that's all that's going to be to it. And I'm like, well, you know, that's probably what the dinosaurs thought. You know what I mean? I don't know what to say. I mean, I think that most of the writers that are the classic writers that are still being read today, like Mary Shelley, and Conan Doyle, H.G. Wells, these guys, they went with the times. They went with what was, you know, popular then. And I think if they were alive today, they'd be doing the same stuff too. They'd have podcasts and everything online and on the phones. They would. They just wouldn't, you know. Burroughs would too. Burroughs used to write his books, his later books, on a dictaphone. Can you imagine doing that? Sitting there and just talking into a recorder the new Tarzan book. That's what he would do. His secretary typed them all up word for word. Exactly what he said. I couldn't do that. You know, I sort of have to see what I'm doing, you know, kind of craft it a little bit. But Conan Doyle used to write his Sherlock Holmes stories during cricket matches. Those are very intricate mysteries. And he's just a brilliant man. You know, or in crowded ballrooms, they would say. He would be over there scribbling on envelopes and things.
I've written many of my stories in a food court, busy food court. Because first of all, it's great white noise, great background noise, so you can just focus. But also, if you need to randomly put an NPC in your book, you just go, that guy over there by the Chinese food, his name is Bob. Yeah, it's just humanity, a big old crowd of noisy humanity is a great writing place for me. But Martin, you also bring up a very good point, which is you mentioned Wells and Verne and Burroughs and all those other guys, and really, except for a couple of exceptions, which are obvious, those books are still G or PG, not even PG-13.
Yeah.
And partly because they were written in an age where it wasn't appropriate to like have, you know, H.G. Wells dropping F-bombs. No.
Yeah,
No.
Victorian age.
Yeah. So it's like, so you bring up a good point, which is those are good gateway books for kids into science fiction, fantasy, gothic, you know, light horror. Because like I would never have thought about like stopping my daughter when she was younger from reading Wells or Verne or even Mary Shelley, although Mary Shelley's Frankenstein's a couple of moments are a little heavy.
Yeah, that's very murder of a child.
Yeah. There's, you, as a parent, you always need to like think it twice, double check. The idea of having to go back and read those books so that my dog, so I can, you know, make sure they're okay for my daughter. What a terrible chore! Oh no, twist my arm. But if you're trying to get kids interested in reading, those are still really good authors for that because, for the most part, it's still safe.
And they're still being printed. You know,
Yeah, that helps.
Never have been out of print, most of them.
But also still relevant. I was watching. There's a channel on YouTube that does science fiction shorts called Dust. Very good. And they had this one called Worlds Apart, where this World War II soldier wakes up in a bed in London while it's being bombed, and there's this old guy sitting in a chair at the foot of his bed, and I just went, that's H.G. Wells. And my wife went, well, how did you know that? I just got that feeling. It was H.G. Wells, and he was basically complaining about how nobody had listened to him, and World War II had been resolved because the Martians had invaded Germany, and they were making their way across the channel at that moment. And I'm just thinking, it's H.G. Wells sitting in a chair, clutching a leather-bound book. It was just great. And I think they published that video like 4 days ago or 5 days ago. Still relevant.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It was at a time when the concept of all ages, like literature or whatever, didn't really exist. It was there, but it wasn't called that. And today, yeah, I mean, I've mentioned before, you know, people say, what kind of stuff, you know, like, you know, you're meeting a family member or something you haven't seen in a while, and what do? You know, they don't really understand what you do. I'll tell them, and they say, well, what kind of books do you write? Well, I said, that's a long answer. So I just say, well, most of my stuff, not all of it, but most of it is all ages appropriate stuff. And they kind of say, oh, you write for kids. I'm like, Star Wars is all ages. Star Trek is all ages. I mean, these are, Star Trek, especially, some pretty mature storylines, often very thoughtful, thought-provoking things. So it doesn't mean that you're writing down to anyone. It just means that everybody should be able to enjoy it. I remember reading Frankenstein when I was, first time when I was like 9, I think. It's pretty heavy going for a 9-year-old. But I did it, and I thought, wow, that's a lot different than any of the movies I've ever seen. But I thought it was really cool. And then when I reread it again when I was maybe 13 or 14, a whole different experience, right? Just those few years. And then I've read it maybe 20 times. Maybe. It's the book I've read the most. And by the time I was like 19, I remember reading it. And again, it was just like this real profound even experience reading it that made me eventually, not long after that, write my own graphic novel version of it, which I have downstairs on my table. And it's been in print since 1989. And it's something that I was really excited to do, and it's very much Mary's story. It's maybe about 20% of me in it. I didn't change anything in her story, I just added things she alluded to, I showed them. That's basically all it was. But it was something, it's probably the story that's resonated the best with me over the years. That and well, the thing that probably really got me into a lot of this, though, that I'm thinking about, I remember being about 5 or 6 years old in the backyard playing in a sandbox. And my mom comes outside, and she says, there's a movie on TV right now about my mom was from the hills of Tennessee. She had a very interesting way of speaking. And she said, there's a movie on TV right now. It's about a giant gorilla. And I think you'd like it. Giant what? Gorilla. Oh, gorilla. Oh, yeah, I like gorillas. And so I came in and sat down, and it was like the last half of King Kong, the original Kong.
Oh.
And the one and the only. And I kind of sat there and was watching it, and my jaw just dropped. I mean, I was just like, what in the, the dinosaurs and just all this stuff. And it wasn't until maybe a year or so after that I found out dinosaurs were real. And that blew my mind. So constantly having my mind blown from about the age of 5 up until, well, yesterday, maybe probably today too, it's been I just always seem like that I've been in the right place at the right time or something like that. Of course, one thing leads to another, and so on and so forth. But that led me to study paleontology in college. I worked for a world-class museum for about 5 years. Doing dinosaur digs and prepping fossils and things like that. It was really rewarding stuff. But I have to say I did that after I worked for Disney for a while, or I wrote for Disney for a while, and I just didn't want to have another single creative thought. But it was a great experience, but boy, was it draining. And you can't have an ego and write for Disney. You just can't, because it's not yours. You don't, by the end of the day, you don't know what you wrote. Where is it? Is it in there at all? That kind of thing. And that was fine. That was fine for what it was. I learned a lot. And it's great people working there. I understand it's much better now. So that's great.
But that's one of the pieces of young adult literature is the trusted labels. I mean, and again, as a 50-year-old guy, I don't really care who made my t-shirt or my shoes, as long as it's comfortable. But for my 15-year-old daughter, she'll look at that before she looks at the fabric. I mean, you gotta have that thing. And that carries over into everything in their life. And I don't care about my cell phone, I don't care, I have an iPhone 2 or whatever. But same thing for books. It's a lot easier to get a book in a kid's hand if it's got a known, if it's Star Wars, or if it's Marvel, or if it's Harry Potter. There's a buy-in culturally. It's been culturally accepted, and And that's a powerful thing.
It is.
And if you can tap into those, and I think, one of the things that you mentioned is using those fairy tales as sort of the fodder for storyline. It's a way to tap into the same thing without a Disney entity behind you.
Right.
You're still tapping into something that's known and has buy-in.
I think that the two, that's very true. And I think another thing as well that's going on these days, which is a very positive thing for kids, is they're starting to learn, like when I was a kid, for example, Lee Falk's The Phantom. I was big into the monsters too. So Phantom of the Opera, I thought, there's two guys called the Phantom? And that was a little confusing for a while, But kids today, they understand there's the Disney version of Cinderella, and then there's these other versions of Cinderella.
Yeah.
And they get it. They understand there's no confusion there.
Right.
They know that one stops and starts here, another one stops and starts there. They get it. And so I think that's a very positive thing. It gives you a certain open mind to something that we didn't necessarily have when we were kids.
Yeah, and I think you see the same thing, everywhere with them. When I was growing up, I was taught, if this is where you are and this is where you're going, here's the path. For anything, So if you want to be a writer, then you go to college, then you have this thing, and you do this. If you want to be an engineer, this is. But today, if I'm here on my computer and I want to get there, there's 12 ways to get there. And the same thing is true for a career. The same thing is true. It's not you go work for DuPont your whole life and you get advanced. But the same thing's true for reading. They're okay with these complicated connections and everything, and that's really cool. I mean, it really is cool.
Yeah, it is. That's actually, I think, really, it gives me a very optimistic feeling when I see that kind of thing. It doesn't make me want to weep for the future like I used to want to. I see something different going on. Of course, if you're one of the curmudgeons, you don't see that.
Well, the only place that's not cool is new math. I'll go ahead and say that.
Oh, no, don't get me started.
Yeah, so, because that's what that is too. It's like there's 12 ways to get here,
Yeah.
and you're just like...
Well, people ask me all the time, of course, my son wants to be a writer or whatever, my daughter wants to be a writer. How do you get started? And I have absolutely no idea. I mean, I know what I did, but that's a whole different world.
Yeah.
It's just, I started when there was no internet. Stegosaurus was wandering down the street. I don't know. I wouldn't even begin to know how to do this now. I don't know. So I just have to say, I don't know. And they give you that kind of glazed over look like, he just doesn't want to say. So.
Yeah, it takes a lot longer to explain how the technology and everything and the culture has changed so much that, right, my dad worked for IBM for 33 years. And by the time I was 15, he was like, remember all that stuff I told you about how your job is good? Just forget it, just forget it. And just the world changed between me being 5 and me being 25. Just everything changed. It was just crazy. So publishing for kids is like, I keep hearing that it's one of the biggest markets, but then I also keep hearing about people struggling to get published in it because everybody knows it's one of the biggest markets. So a lot of people will go, oh, I'll write kids' books and I'll get published much more easily. No, that's not the way it works, because everybody's heard that and reacts to it. One other thing I want to say real quick is that you guys were suddenly making me realize that why we're seeing Star Wars and Star Trek release programs for children, right? This is absolutely Star Trek and Star Wars, but those stories didn't have to be in those universes. They've got these alien children trying to solve this problem. It doesn't have to be a starship from Star Trek, it could be some other universe. But it gets the parents willing to watch with their kids more. So there's like that, okay, you're in your mid-30s and you've got a 4-year-old, you like Star Trek, they want to watch TV. Oh look, Star Trek for kids on TV. Yeah, I'm suddenly going, yeah, that's actually pretty smart.
Same reason my parents gave me candy cigarettes.
I was not gonna attach those two things, Jerry, but okay. Anybody want to deal with that? Candy cigarettes.
What are your guys' opinion on picture books?
Love.
Yeah.
I've done some.
I've tried to do some.
I think they're great. This is the curmudgeon argument, right? Like you either like, Or you're going, the modern reader is much more visual, and they live in a much more visual world. Saturated with visual. And so I think you have to speak the language.
We do. And remember what it was like when we were kids. When we were reading a book, all of us probably said, the three of us were constantly reading something. But how cool it was when there was a picture in the book. Even just one picture, a frontispiece or something,
Yeah.
And you wanted more, but we were fine that there wasn't. But still, it would have been great if there was more. Absolutely. And so why not give them more?
Yeah. That there was, when I was a kid, if the book had no pictures, that was a big deal. What do you mean there's no pictures at all?
Yeah, wrote up book.
Yeah, that was, even no matter what the audience was, if it had no pictures in it, that was an achievement. Doesn't matter if it was 700 pages or 50 pages. One of the things that I find is that picture books are a different art form. They're not a children's art form. There are, like, graphic novels and picture books to me are close cousins. I don't think graphic novels are in like their own little separate box apart from what you would consider like a traditional children's illustrated book. I grew up, I was raised by teachers, and so every year at Hanukkah we have the picture book that stopped the Hanukkah book that year. I'm in my mid-50s, my daughter is an adult in college, we're still doing it. So it was just soaked into us culturally that there are ways to express really amazing, powerful stories that have to have a picture, and the words are just there to get you into the picture, not the other way around.
That's right. And part of it's tech. You can do it easier now. I remember reading, I devoured the Harding Boys and Nancy Drew as a kid. And like every 30 page, you would look and they'd be like, dude, that truck's in the ditch. I'm reading, And then you're like, dude, there's a guy with a gun. And I can't tell you how many nights I stayed up reading a book because I'd flip and I'd see that picture. And I want to know, And I think in the same way, good picture books today, they don't show you the monster in the main frame. They show you the monster coming in, and you got to turn the page. So they use those images the same way we use text to build that wonder.
It's something that I've noticed in the last few years at Marvel and DC. I've worked for both of them before in the past, but there's a new breed doing those. This is going to sound a little cringy, but one thing that I've noticed that's not happening, that should happen, is there's no reason to turn the page. That you're looking at, instead of a sequential scene taking place before your eyes, they're just pinup pictures that they put together. And that's too bad because these are really talented artists, and I can't understand why they're not telling the story instead of just. They just want the wow, and it's beautiful. You open it up, you're like, wow, look at all that stuff, But nothing, it's not. There's nothing happening really, and the words are very, very sparse these days. Sometimes a whole comic book of like 22 pages or whatever might have 100 words all together, all through it. I don't know. One of the things that I learned early on. And it's true of prose as well, but you've got to figure out some way of getting the reader to want to turn that page. It doesn't have to be something earth-shattering every time, that would get a little monotonous, but there's got to be a reason for them to turn the page. And those pictures like that are a really good idea. Also, I just enjoyed as a kid, looking through a Hardy Boys book or something, you see the picture of the scene. It was cool to read the scene. Right. As well as compare and see, oh yeah, they got all that in there. That was just there's a little extra little study that you didn't mind doing. It was fun.
Yeah, that element of wonder, and I know it's 20-something years old at this point, and it's no longer the up trending up or whatever. But I remember reading Harry Potter out loud to my kids. They're in their 30s now. I remember reading it out loud to them, and I remember one of my kids going, "The staircases move." And I remember thinking as a dad, like, dude, she's made going between classes cool. Like, how did that happen? But turn the page. And I think Goosebumps does that well too. If you read Stein stuff, every chapter's, and then he about died.
Was it Brad Strickland who wrote Wishbone? I could have sworn it was a book series too, but I know it's a TV series. It's a Jack Russell Terrier who is a full-blown nerd cosplayer. Every week he'd get into some kind of different adventure where he'd be Robin Hood or Sherlock Holmes or something. And for reasons I won't get into, I was forced to watch it, and I'm just like, oh, okay, whatever, I hit play. And half an hour later, I'm like, I want to watch more, this is awesome. And it is, it's the intended audience is kids, and kids with, you know, big imaginations, and this Jack Russell Terrier is walking them through how to be a geek and how to have an imagination and cosplay and have fun. And I recommend those books to everybody. Or the show, again, not sure it's a book. I recommend the show to everybody because it's so well done, it's so good. The dialogue and writing is very clever and funny. It's all ages, family appropriate, and it's just whimsical. To me, it's a great example of what you can do with what sounds on paper. I judged it from a distance, and I was completely wrong. On paper, it sounds like a terrible idea. Right? A terrier in cosplay. Go. Just no. No. But it's terrific.
I think it started as books. I'm pretty sure he was coming to DragonCon, and
Yeah, I thought it was books
if I'm
first.
not mistaken, he may have passed away,
Oh.
but I think somebody else picked it up. So I don't know how many there were, but they talked about it a lot of DragonCon.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm blanking on how many books and when the books were, but yeah. Right.
It's been a while.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Well, one of the things too that I think we need to keep in mind is how quickly things change and how quickly things become forgotten. Already Harry Potter is fading.
Yeah.
And some of that's for reasons that have nothing to do with the books themselves. But, and I never would have thought that 20 years ago. I would have thought these are going to be around forever.
Right.
But it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. It's almost kind of like what happened with the Oz books. There was a time, around the time of the last century, where L. Frank Baum was one of the best-selling authors that ever has lived. And same thing with Burroughs. Burroughs was the best-selling author in the world in the 1920s. But and a lot of people today don't even know that there's more than one Oz book. Everybody thinks of Wizard of Oz. And that's just one of them, and it's not the best one. I don't. But I've always loved the Oz books. I always try to mention them whenever I do a panel like this because it's a shame that they're kind of ignored today. There's 14 of them, of the original ones, and there's others that the Baum's estate hired to write, and they're good too. But they're, I mean, a lot of this other stuff, I don't think Harry Potter would exist without the Oz books. They're just wonderful, and they still are wonderful today. And they're great to read out loud to kids.
Yeah.
And they're profusely illustrated, which is another thing that's great about them. But yeah, I consider them the greatest children's series of all time. I just don't think that you can really beat them. But today, a lot of people just don't know. They're like, yeah, we've seen Judy Garland. That's not the Judy Garland movie. I love that too. Yes, it's probably the most beloved movie ever made. But it's not the books. I did a graphic novel version of Wizard of Oz, and I wanted to do it because they wanted me to stick as close to Baum as I possibly could, and I wanted to show everybody knows the movie back and forth, you know. And the thing that's really cool about that movie, though, is even little kids that are about, you know, like 6 or 7 years old, they don't see it as an old movie. You know, nobody thinks about that. It's timeless. It really, truly is. But in the book, the Wicked Witch dies middle ways in the book, and so there's a whole lot more that happens after that nobody knows about. And so that's one reason why I really wanted to do it. They ended up, of course, I usually have no say. In my non-kids books, I usually recruit the artists and things myself, but in the kids' books, not so much. They have, you know, probably a gallery of artists that they choose from. I've been pleased with almost all of them.
Hey, Mark. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's 5 minutes till noon.
Thank you, appreciate that. But the thing about it is I remember getting the Oz book, and it's done in kind of a manga style. And at first I was like, what? But then the more I went through it, I thought, you know, this is actually kind of cool. You know, it took me a minute to get over my curmudgeon-y, you know, maybe about 3 or 4 pages before I thought, I could see why a kid would want to, you know, look at this stuff. I mean, the Tin Man kind of looked like the Iron Giant, you know, and so that was kind of cool, and it just the whole thing was fun. Yes, I do have another panel coming up shortly. Does anybody have the last couple questions or anything like that? We're glad you showed up.
Thank y'all for being here.
Thought we were going to be talking to that back wall for a while.
Thank y'all.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.